Before I start today's episode, I just want to say thank you to everyone for continuing to support and listen to Scottish Murders. I really appreciate your patience while I took a break to get more episodes written. It took a bit longer than I thought, as I've also launched a new business, which aims to help people who'd love to start a podcast of their own but just don't know how to, and existing podcasters who maybe just need a bit of support or help in growing their podcast, or by introducing them to small businesses or freelancers who can help them with their podcasting needs, such as producers, editors, website designers, voice coaches, or graphic designers. If you're listening and thinking, ooh, that's me, then feel free to get in touch on social media or at contact@cluedenton.com and see how we can help you. Our socials and email address will be in the show notes. However, the break is now over, so let's get into the case. I'm your host, Dawn. This case is a solved murder that happened in 1981 in Dumfries, and my source for this story came from the British Newspaper Archive. I'm also giving a trigger warning, as this case does cover the topic of domestic abuse, rape, and a suicide attempt. There are a number of people involved in today's story. There's husband and wife David and Veronica Little, babysitter Elaine Haggerty, and William Mackenzie, a local young man who was a part-time supermarket attendant and on a territorial army course at a barracks in Edinburgh. And 3 of them would end up in court on a charge of murder. As I've found on many an occasion, sadly there is not much known about the 4 before the murder was committed. Like I said, William Mackenzie, who was 17 years old, was a part-time supermarket assistant on a part-time territorial army course at the barracks in Edinburgh and lived at Cairn Drive in Dumfries, which is about a 10-minute drive from the centre of Dumfries. 17-year-old Elaine Haggerty lived with her parents and her 16-year-old brother Edward in Cairn Circle, a 2-minute walk from where William lived. 30-year-old Veronica and 34-year-old David Little also lived in Cairn Circle, close to Elaine and her family. Veronica was a housewife and carer to the couple's young daughter Samantha, and David was a car dealer and owned a garage in Dumfries. The pair had married in 1976, and quickly afterwards the couple had their daughter Samantha, with local girl Elaine beginning to babysit for the couple's daughter Samantha in 1978, when Elaine was 13 years old. However, unbeknownst to Veronica, David had not only been married before, but he'd been in Carstairs Mental Hospital following being charged with rape. Veronica didn't become aware of these facts until 2 years into her marriage. However, despite Veronica's marriage having begun to go wrong almost from the start, she wouldn't have believed just how it would have ended in November 1981. By the beginning of 1981, Elaine Haggerty, who was then 15, was by this time babysitting for the Littles 3 or 4 times a week, and would often stay overnight. Veronica had been aware that Elaine had become friendly with her husband. However, it wouldn't be until June 1981 when she would find out the true extent of their relationship, leading to the beginning of the end. Veronica's marriage had been a tough one, an abusive one, almost from the start, where David would fly into a rage and beat, kick and threaten Veronica, with one beating being so bad that she had to have a spinal operation, which left her with a limp. David had, on a number of occasions, forcibly put a distraught and beaten Veronica out of their house, with their young daughter Samantha being left alone in the house with her father. And on another occasion, David had even threatened to put his daughter Samantha in a pine box. Veronica would regularly write to her friend Ruth, who lived in Liverpool in England, telling her just how awful her marriage was, how she was regularly beaten by David, and Ruth was becoming more and more concerned for Veronica, especially when, in September 1980, she received another letter from Veronica, which, according to the Aberdeen Press and Journal in March 1982, stated, "I was rushed into hospital with pains in my belly. I thought it was my appendix, but I was 6 weeks pregnant. I lost it. I am glad in a way because it was David's. When I went back, he raped me because I didn't want him to touch me. I am so fed up with this life. I don't think it's worth living. However, Ruth received another letter from Veronica less than a year later, which gave her some hope that her friend would soon be out of the awful situation she found herself in. Veronica wrote, "I have some good news. I am getting divorced, thanks to Elaine. Remember I told you about the beatings I was getting? Elaine witnessed some of them and went to the lawyer and told her about them." However, Veronica's jubilation would be very short-lived when she sadly lost custody of her daughter Samantha to her husband David, at which point she took an overdose of drugs, but was found in time and taken to hospital. But let's go back a wee bit. How did Elaine go from being friendly with David to going to Veronica's lawyer with her and telling her about the abuse and trying to get Veronica a divorce from David? Well, it all started in June 1981, when apparently David and Elaine were ready to make Veronica aware of their growing relationship. And letters that were later found would back this up, with one letter from David to Elaine reading, again according to the Aberdeen Press and Journal, "I do wish you would phone the doctor and get the pill, then I would come out on the grass with you. I love you forever." And a letter from Elaine in reply reading, "My darling, I have started taking the pill. I am ready when you are. All my love, Elaine." Although it would appear David was not willing to wait for Elaine to not only go on the pill, but become of age, as the letters and diary entries found later showed that the pair had first had sex on the 2nd of November 1980 on the bathroom floor of the Littles' house, when Elaine was 14 years old, with another letter from David to Elaine saying, "We must go to the doctors. I think you should consider having an abortion. I am as much to blame as you because I should have pushed you into going onto the pill." There were many sexually explicit diary entries and letters between Elaine and David found and printed in newspapers at the time, but I'm not going to go into those details. Suffice to say, Elaine and David were having regular sex from between the 2nd of November 1980 until at least the 18th of July 1981, when Elaine would have been 14 and 15 years old. She would become pregnant and miscarried. But it would ultimately be David's fists being turned on Elaine that would lead to the end of that relationship, Veronica losing custody of her daughter, Veronica taking an overdose, the pending divorce between David and Veronica, a murder, and 3 people being charged with that murder. Okay, so back to June 1981, when David and Elaine are ready to tell Veronica about their relationship. And I'm using that word very loosely. Now standing in front of David and Elaine, hearing what they had to say, Veronica possibly hadn't guessed that something was going on between the pair before, or maybe hadn't realised that it had turned sexual, with Veronica later admitting that Elaine wasn't the first woman my husband had had, and that she just accepted it. Perhaps though it was the fact that Elaine was underage, just a child, and that David had brutally told her that Elaine had become pregnant with his child. Whatever the reason, it was at this point Veronica had become incensed enough to stand up to David this time, which in turn led to David hitting Veronica so hard in the face that he broke her nose. Elaine, perhaps shocked and trying to help, intervened, but only caused a furious David to slap her across the face too, resulting in Veronica finally snapping and throwing David out of their home, saying she wanted a divorce. However, it would appear that Veronica had been wanting a divorce from David for some time, with a letter later being found in David's flat from Veronica which read, "I will never be happy as long as you are alive. I pray every night you are dead. As for divorce, I need proof of adultery. I hate you." Veronica now had the proof of adultery she needed for a divorce, which was only backed up when Elaine herself spoke to Veronica's solicitor and confirmed not only their affair, but the years of abuse Veronica had suffered at the hands of her husband David, which Elaine actually witnessed, including being hit herself by David, the day David and Elaine confronted Veronica about their relationship. Following being hit by David, Elaine did carry on seeing him for a while, with it later being disclosed that David had told Elaine that if she did not continue to see him, he would kill her. Veronica's jubilation at finally having David out of her home and a divorce pending would be short-lived though, when David sought and received custody of their daughter Samantha. with it being known that David only wanted custody of Samantha, so he would automatically be given a flat by the council in order to house Samantha. Veronica was devastated by this decision and fearful for her daughter's safety, although she did not defend this action, as David had threatened to kill her too if she did so. It was following this devastating decision being made that Veronica took an overdose of drugs. Veronica was taken to hospital though, and she did recover. By this time, Elaine had finally broken free of David too, and Veronica and Elaine became close. So close, in fact, that there began to be talk, which later newspapers would regularly repeat, of Veronica and Elaine being in a relationship, with a barmaid at a local club later telling the court that Veronica and Elaine used to come to the club together on Friday nights and were always together, and David's employee at his garage, Robert, saying that David had said to him at one point that Veronica and Elaine were having a lesbian relationship. Although Robert also told the court that David had told him about his broken marriage to Veronica, and that Veronica had also told him that David had been beating her up. Elaine's father, Mr. Haggerty, also told the court that when David and Veronica split up, Elaine went from spending 3 or 4 days a week at the little home to spending a lot more time there. And when pushed, he added that he didn't know what kind of relationship existed between his daughter and Veronica. Although Mr. Haggerty also said that despite his young daughter spending 3 to 4 nights a week at the Littles, becoming close to David Little, with David Little becoming a frequent visitor at the Haggerty house, and David and Elaine going out and seeing a lot of each other, when he found out Elaine had become pregnant and later miscarried, he had no idea who the father was. Now, we've heard all about David, Veronica, and Elaine, and the turbulent, abusive, and somewhat inappropriate relationships they had, and there being a clear motive on all sides for a murder to take place. But let's not forget about 17-year-old William Mackenzie, a part-time supermarket assistant and on a part-time territorial army course. How exactly did he become involved? Well, if you remember, he lived near Veronica, David, and Elaine, about a 2-minute walk away, so he likely knew or knew of all three. While it's not known exactly which story is correct, as there were 3 different versions reported, one being that William had either been casually dating Elaine, and when he heard that David Little had slapped her across the face, he flew into a rage and swore revenge. Or he and Veronica had grown close and started a sexual relationship since Veronica had thrown David out, and he couldn't bear how badly David had and still was treating Veronica. Or William had no actual vested interest in either Veronica or Elaine and had innocently and blindly helped them out when asked. So from that, you might just have guessed by now who was found murdered. It was 34-year-old David Little. David was shot on the 25th of November 1981 near where he lived in Dumfries, but his body was found a few days later, 3 miles away in a lay-by covered with grass and coal sacks. The murder investigation began straight away, and very soon a voluntary statement was received admitting to David Little's murder, leading to 17-year-old Elaine Haggerty, 17-year-old William Mackenzie, and 30-year-old Veronica Little being arrested and charged with David Little's murder. Although in court, this voluntary statement was retracted and other versions of events were laid down. But which version of events were to be believed? Let me tell you the differing versions, and you can decide. Within days of David Little's body being found and the murder investigation beginning, the net was already closing in on possible suspects, which is when one suspect came forward to make a statement, confessing to the crime. 17-year-old William Mackenzie told detectives that while he had pulled the trigger that killed David Little, he had actually been asked to do it by 17-year-old Elaine Haggerty and 30-year-old Veronica Little, and being paid £70 by the pair to do so. William went on to say that he had gotten another £50 while rifling through the pockets of David after he was dead, which Elaine and Veronica told him that he could keep. William said that the reason Elaine and Veronica wanted David dead was because he had beaten them up and was threatening to kill Elaine if she did not keep going out with him. Based on this statement, all 3 were arrested. But when asked to make a plea at court, Veronica, Elaine and William denied murdering David Little. Elaine and Veronica denied paying William £120 to shoot him, and Elaine and William denied concealing the body. William lodged a special defence of incrimination against Veronica, and a trial date was set for March 1982. First on the stand was the detective who had taken the confession statement from William Mackenzie. He went on to read the statement in full, saying that William had stated that he had tried to kill David a few nights before, but didn't have the guts to do it. But on the 25th of November, he told the detectives that he waited in the Haggerty family's garden for about 2.5 hours until he heard David Little and Elaine coming up the lane to Elaine's house. William said that he then watched Elaine and David go into Elaine's family home, at which point he said he shifted his position and waited about 5 minutes until he saw David come back out of the house alone. This was confirmed later by both Elaine's father and brother, with Elaine's dad saying that he himself came home on the 25th of November about 11 p.m. and that Elaine and David Little had arrived about 10 minutes later, that David had stayed about 5 or 10 minutes before leaving, and that Elaine had then gone to her room. Elaine's brother, 16-year-old Edward, also confirmed that David and Elaine had come to the house on the night of the 25th of November, and that once David had left, Elaine came into Edward's room and had gone through his window, telling him that she was going to see Veronica. Back outside, with William in his new hiding place, as David came back out of the Haggerty household, William shot him, with William stating, according to the Scotsman on the 16th of March 1982, David fell down and got back up again, and he started running towards me. I shot him twice more, and when he was down, I walked up to him and shot him again in the head. With David now lying in the Haggerty's front garden, having been shot 5 times, William said he left and went to Veronica's house, where he told her what he had done, and in reply, Veronica apparently said, "Well done." He said that Elaine arrived at Veronica's about half an hour later, and he and Elaine had taken a wheelbarrow to Elaine's front garden, put David's body in it and wheeled it to David's own car parked nearby, before putting David's body in the boot and driving about 3 miles outside of Dumfries, where they dumped David's body in a lay-by and covered it with grass and a couple of coal sacks. Now, it wasn't an isolated house that the Haggertys lived at, it was in a scheme. So you're maybe wondering, didn't any neighbours hear anything? Didn't the Haggertys hear anything? Well, it was reported that a next-door neighbour of the Haggertys said they did hear 2 shots, then a man's voice saying, "You," followed by 2 further shots in quick succession. However, when the neighbour looked out of the window, he saw nothing. I can't find anything in the newspapers or from the trial to suggest that the Haggerty family had heard gunshots coming from their own front garden on the night David Little was murdered. I'm assuming they would have been asked. Maybe they had the TV on too loudly. The court also heard that on the day David Little was shot and killed, Elaine withdrew £40 from her bank account, and that 2 days later, after David had been shot, William paid in £120 to his account, claiming he had received £40 from Elaine, £30 from Veronica, and had got £50 while going through David's pockets, which he had received in turn for killing David Little. It was also revealed in court that during the investigation, a rifle that matched the one used to kill David Little had been found in a locked bedroom in William Mackenzie's house, and that while William was in custody in prison, he allegedly told a fellow prisoner that he had done it, but that there were 2 women involved. Okay, so it sounds quite clear-cut. However, when the case got to court, William Mackenzie was telling a different version of events. While William, now 18 years old, was admitting that the rifle used to kill David had been his, according to an article in the Scotsman on the 20th of March 1982, the finger on the trigger had not been his, but that of Veronica Little. William's new version of events was this. 4 days before David was shot and killed, apparently Elaine asked William if she and Veronica could borrow his rifle to go rabbit shooting, to which he agreed and took the gun to Veronica's house on the Monday. David was shot on the Tuesday, along with 85 rounds of ammunition. However, the next day, Tuesday, Elaine went back to William's home with the gun and said that it wasn't working properly and that they had put a bullet into Veronica's bed by mistake. William then stated that at this point Elaine had asked William if he wanted to earn £100, to which William replied, yes. This was when Elaine apparently told him that the money would be for lifting David's body into the boot of his car. William said he simply didn't realise what Elaine had meant. He thought perhaps that David was already dead. Either way, he readily agreed. Elaine then asked to borrow the apparently faulty rifle again, but this time she asked if William would take it to her house and leave it outside, which again he agreed to, saying that he just thought the two women planned to go rabbit shooting the next day. Having deposited his rifle outside Elaine's house, William went about his day, before later that same day apparently being asked by Elaine to meet Veronica at the rear of Elaine's house shortly after 11 p.m. William said he did as he was asked, and as he got nearer Elaine's house, he said he saw Veronica standing at the corner of the house. He said that as he walked towards her, he saw David walking down the Haggerty's path, at which point Veronica apparently started shooting at David. William thought 4 or 5 shots. He said that one of the shots hit David and he fell down, before getting back up again holding his back and turning and starting to run back towards Elaine's house. However, realising that was where the shooter was, David turned again and ran for the garden gate, but Veronica apparently was too quick for him, and she fired 3 or 4 more shots, taking David to the ground once again. Veronica then apparently walked calmly towards David's body and shot him once more in the head, before then dropping the rifle and returning to her own home. William said he was in shock at what he had just seen, but that he picked up the rifle and also went to Veronica's house, where he said Elaine arrived shortly afterwards. He said that despite being in shock still, he and Elaine took a wheelbarrow to Elaine's garden, picked up David's body and wheeled it to David's nearby car, putting it in the boot and driving 3 miles outside of Dumfries and dumping David's body. He said that going through David's pockets he found £70 and he gave it to Elaine, and Elaine gave him £20 back. Elaine and Veronica apparently then went to William's house the following night and gave him a further £100. So that's now the new version of events according to William. Taking to the stand for the defence to potentially back this up was a barmaid who said that Veronica had spoken to her previously about her relationship with David, saying that he was bothering her and she would shoot the bastard. But the barmaid did say that she thought Veronica was only joking. In reply, when it was Veronica's turn to take to the stand, she said that she may have said she was going to shoot the bastard, but she had not pulled the trigger, nor had she offered 17-year-old William Mackenzie any money to carry out the shooting. She did say that on the night of David's shooting and murder, William Mackenzie had come to her home and told her that he had shot David. When asked why she'd kept quiet and not told the police this, she said that William had threatened to rope her in if she said anything. When cross-examining William, Veronica's QC asked William if he was asking the court to believe that Veronica, with her injured back and rather lame leg, had suddenly become a crack shot in the dark, to which William replied, yes. Remember though that William was a part-time soldier, had likely been trained with rifles, and was reported to be a crack shot. When William was asked why he made his initial statement admitting to being the one who shot and killed William, he said he made the statement to cover for Veronica and Elaine because of his passion for Veronica. On summing up, the defence counsel told the jury of 9 women and 6 men that the killing of David Little had been a classic case of women getting together to secure the death of a man, and that the killing had been carried out with cold-blooded efficiency by a contract man hired by the 2 women. He claimed that the evidence against William Mackenzie, being the one to pull the trigger, was overwhelming, bearing in mind his initial statement to the police and the fact that it was very unlikely William's alternative story of Veronica Little being a crack shot in the dark from a distance was in any way true, although he did maintain that both women had jointly been involved in the murder plot, with Elaine having led David to the place where his killer was waiting. Although Veronica's QC put it to the jury that William had shot David after Elaine, who he was fond of, told him David had beaten her up, and that while William may have threatened to shoot David in front of Veronica, she had not taken it seriously and knew nothing of the shooting until after David was already dead. He went on to say that it was clear William had been the shooter and that he'd threatened to rope in both Veronica and Elaine if they said anything, before then trying to shift the guilt to the two women. Elaine's QC told the jury that there was no evidence that she actually wanted David dead, that while, yes, there was evidence that she had helped to move David's body and hide it after the shooting, there was no evidence that she was involved before this. And William's QC maintained that it was Veronica who had been the one to pull the trigger. So what do you think? Who do you think pulled the trigger? Do you think all three were involved in the plot to kill David, or did William plan and execute David's murder himself? Well, after 100 minutes of deliberation, this is what the jury thought. Guilty. They found all three guilty of David Little's murder. According to an article in the Scotsman on the 24th of March 1982, 31-year-old Veronica Little was sentenced to life imprisonment. 18-year-old William Mackenzie was sent to a Young Offenders Institute for life, and 18-year-old Elaine Haggerty was sentenced to be detained without limit of time in such a place and for such a time as might be determined by the Secretary of State. Following being sentenced, Veronica collapsed against the rail of the dock. Elaine burst into tears, and William just gave a wry grin before they were led, or in Veronica's case, carried from the court. Do you think the right verdict and sentences were given? Apparently, as the sentences were read out, 1 or 2 of the 9 women on the jury burst into tears. Maybe they weren't 100% sure they had made the right call, or maybe it just shocked them what people can do to each other. What do you think? Of course, there was the obligatory appeal made by Veronica and Elaine, where it was claimed by their QCs at the Court of Criminal Appeal that there was no direct evidence that either woman had instigated the murder by offering money. However, in February 1983, both appeals failed. William Mackenzie never appealed against his sentence. Now for a new segment called Scotland Then. Long-term listeners will know that over the years I've tried out various different things in episodes, including a Dawn's Digest at one point. Well, this segment is kind of like that, in that I'll tell you different information, but instead of it being what I've been up to, I thought I'd let you know some of the other stories that were being covered in newspapers in Scotland around about the time each episode's case was from. A few stories have caught my eye over the years, so I thought, why not share them with you? Let me know what you think of the new segment. The following stories appeared in the newspapers at the same time the murder trial of David Little was going on. My sources are articles from the Scotsman on the 16th, 17th and 24th of March 1982 and the Press and Journal on the 16th, 17th and 23rd of March 1982. Okay, first off, yes, there were other murders that happened around about the same time as the murder of David Little, including the murder of 19-year-old Kay Shepherd, who was a student nurse from St Andrews, who was stabbed by her 19-year-old boyfriend, Andrew Smith. The pair had been on a night out in St Andrews, along with another couple, before they returned to St Andrews Golf Club, where they had a meal and continued to drink. The pair then went back to their room, and Andrew said he was woken up later by Kay, and she already had a knife in her chest. The knife was Andrew's, which he had taken from his work as he thought there might be trouble on the night out. The stab wound inflicted on Kay was 3 inches, and it had penetrated the outer wall of her heart, and she died later the same day. Andrew Smith was found guilty of Kay Shepherd's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment in a youth offenders institution. There also were attempted murders in court during this period, with a newspaper heading reading, "Woman tried to kill child as sacrifice." This story obviously involves the attempted murder of a child, but it also touches on mental health issues. 31-year-old Jeanette Barnes said in the High Court in Edinburgh that she wanted to get revenge against the British people, and it is for this reason that I attacked the child, because British people do not like child attackers. She was reported to have thought she was being persecuted in a high-powered conspiracy by the Mafia and the Department of Health and Social Security, and that no one was listening to her. So in order to get the British people's attention, she felt attacking a child was the only thing left for me to do. Going on to say that she deliberately picked her victim from a working-class area because working-class people had taunted her when she told them that the Mafia were after her. Jeanette dragged a 4-year-old boy from a playground and stabbed him, causing a 3-inch wound on his upper abdomen, penetrating to a depth of between 4 and 6 inches. It was reported that the only thing which stopped the knife coming out of the back of the child was the vertebral column. The 4-year-old boy underwent an emergency operation, and it was reported that he would recover to normal health, but would always walk with a limp. The child was said to have been suffering from nightmares and had become very wary of strangers. Jeanette was picked up hours later by police, but not before she had smashed windows at the Department of Employment offices in Edinburgh and 2 shop windows with a hammer. She was declared fit to plead guilty by 2 psychiatrists who diagnosed Jeanette as having paranoid schizophrenia, and they recommended that she be sent to Carstairs State Mental Hospital as they believed she posed a threat to the public. Following pleading guilty to the attempted murder of the 4-year-old boy, Jeanette Barnes was ordered to be detained at Carstairs State Mental Hospital without limit of time. A pretty disturbing story for a number of reasons. Jeanette clearly needed help. It just came a bit too late for her 4-year-old victim, his carefree childhood having been abruptly taken away from him. Okay, so this next story made me actually go and physically wince, with the article headline reading, "Leap for Freedom Lands Man in Court on a Stretcher." So this happened at Dunfermline Sheriff Court, where a 22-year-old man naming himself David Lunt was appearing in court after admitting stealing £391 or $513 from the till of a store. While waiting for his turn in court, he was being held in the police detention room on the top floor of the court building, and he somehow managed to escape through a window. However, he slipped and ended up falling the 35 feet, or just over 10 metres, to the stone pavement below. Incredibly, he did get back up again and slowly began to limp away. But he didn't get far because both of his heels were smashed from the fall. That bit just made my toes curl. Anyway, his court appearance was deferred and he was taken to hospital, where it was reported later that his heels were so badly smashed he would never be able to run again, but that he would be able to walk again in about 8 weeks. However, upon David Lunt jumping from the courthouse window and his case being postponed, it was reported that it was at this point that investigations were made, and this was when his true identity was revealed, that of Arthur Delamere. It wasn't reported why he gave a false name. I would have thought maybe because Arthur Delamere would have had other convictions that he didn't want the police to know about, but that wasn't reported. Nothing about him giving a false name initially was reported about again. Everyone was more interested in his leap from the top of a building. Anyway, not long afterwards, the now correctly identified Arthur Delamere was back in court, this time carried into the dock on a stretcher by 2 prison officers, where he faced not only the charge of stealing the money from the store till, but also charges of giving the assumed name of David Lunt, deliberately misleading the court, and attempting to defeat justice by jumping from the detention room window. He pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment. I mean, I've never been to prison, so I'm not best placed to comment really, but I'm not sure I'd have risked my life of possibly falling out of a top floor window in order to get away from receiving 6 months in prison. But like I said, maybe I'm not best placed to comment. Anyway, it ended well, as it was later reported by Arthur's counsel that Arthur was now determined to give up his life of crime. His girlfriend has told him she is pregnant. He has now committed himself to marrying her. Oh, the next article I found was really interesting, and it was headed, "Suspects Can Be Taped, City Police Are Told." It was being reported that starting from April 1982, tape recorders were going to be used in the interrogation of suspects in Aberdeen police stations for the first time. The pilot scheme, as it was being called at the time, had already been in operation in Dundee and Falkirk police stations for almost 2 years prior, and it would be extended to include Glasgow police stations the following month. It was so interesting finding out the exact timings when the taping of interviewing suspects came in around Scotland. It's just commonplace now. But back then it was still being piloted, with it being reported that while there had been no reported challenging technical difficulties in recording questioning on tape since the pilot began in Dundee and Falkirk in May 1980, there were difficulties still to be resolved regarding bringing tapes as evidence before a court, as at that time the pilot was limited to a small number of cases, so it hadn't been an issue at that time. Well, they clearly managed to work out these difficulties, as the recording of interviews is now no longer just a pilot. I just thought it was interesting to hear about something that we all know about from TV shows, being a pilot and its future not being certain at that point. And finally, this brought back loads of memories for me, so hopefully a bit of nostalgia for you too. It was an advert that caught my eye, and it read, "Scotland's newest video store is now open, and this is your invite to join our video club for all the latest films on VHS and beta formats." Who remembers a video store and club? This ad wasn't a Blockbuster one, which we had in Oban. It was a J. Crawford video store in Edinburgh, and J even listed the top 10 films at the time of the advert. They were Private Benjamin, 10, Gregory's Girl, Outlaw Josie Wales, The Jazz Singer, The Champ, Clash of the Titans, Watership Down, Lord of the Rings, and The Last Snows of Spring. I haven't heard of all of them, but I've seen Private Benjamin. I love that film. I remember recording it and watching it so much that the tape started to go fuzzy, just go snowy, but I still watched it. What else? Gregory's Girl. Don't really remember this film too much. But Watership Down. No, my gran absolutely loves this film to this day. We used to watch that together many a time. Ah, memories. What memories do these top 10 films of 1982 evoke for you? It would be great to hear what your favourites were from back then, that you played so often you wore the tape down. Well, I hope you enjoyed this new segment. I do enjoy a blast from the past sometimes, or to find out where and when something started. It's interesting. I hope you found it interesting too. Just one final thing before I go. I've got to tell you about the 2 events Peter and I are going to in September. First is the Tremula Festival on the 20th and 21st of September in the South Downs National Park on the outskirts of Brighton. Never been to the South Downs before, so I'm really looking forward to having a walk around. The festival is a celebration of audio storytelling, outdoors, nature and community. And there will be plenty of workshops where we'll be finding out all about recording outdoors and the equipment and conditions needed to do so expertly, as I'm hoping to be camper vanning around parts of Scotland in 2025 with my gran and Peter, revisiting all the places and areas where my gran lived when she was growing up. Some really out of the way but beautiful places. One where we have to hike quite a distance and then cross a rope bridge before finally being anywhere near where one of my gran's previous homes were. And I'm planning on capturing some video and audio of this tour and my gran's memories for my other podcast, Scottish Digest. So I definitely need all the help the Tremula Festival can offer. So we're really looking forward to that. We'll only be there on the first day, Friday the 20th, as then we're heading to London for CrimeCon on the 21st and 22nd of September. And I've just had another look at the speakers and content creators due to be there this year, and it's quite the lineup. Really looking forward to hearing some of the stories shared over the 2 days. If you've not already booked your tickets for CrimeCon, then you're obviously just like me and leave things until the last minute. Well, don't worry, there are still tickets available, and if you quote Scottish, you will receive a further discount at the checkout. The links to both of these events will be in the show notes, or visit scottishmurders.com, and Peter and I look forward to seeing you at either or both events if you can make it. Thanks for listening to another episode of Scottish Murders, the Twice Award shortlisted fortnightly podcast that brings to light the stories of victims and their relentless pursuit for justice. If this case has captivated you, then don't forget to tell a friend to listen or check out scottishmurders.com so together we can share more Scottish Murders. Until next time, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Ton.